Hello, I'm Elaine Petrocelli from Book Passage, the independent bookstore in Corte Madera, California, and San Francisco's Ferry Building. And we're so happy you're with us tonight. And if you're in the area, please come by and see us. If you're far away, please come see us at bookpassage.com. I am so excited about tonight's event. And I'm really grateful to Susan Rollrich, who has agreed to be our interviewer. When the pandemic hit and we were scared to death about what was going to happen, Peter Coyote stepped right up and interviewed so many authors on all different subjects. In fact, after a while, I thought, maybe this is too much. It was never too much for the audience, never too much for me, but the graciousness of that is incredible. And Susan, we really appreciate you being here tonight. And Susan is the author of a book that is merely in its 32nd printing, Poem Crazy, freeing your life with words. She has really the person for learning poetry, appreciating poetry. She holds workshops, and she just doesn't hold them in New York City. She holds them also in libraries way out away from cities. She works with the California Center for the Book and Poets and Writers. Her book is considered one of the top books on writing by the very powerful publisher, Penguin Random House, who published so many books. Her books continue and continue to be important. And she's just smart and joyful and insightful. And you're just going to find her somebody that if you have that book in your library, you're going to read it again. And if you don't, you're going to want it. So thanks to Susan for being here. And of course, Susan is here to interview our dear friend, Peter Coyote. Peter Coyote's been a friend of Book Passage, I think, from before Book Passage was born, but at least when it was born in 1976. As you know, Peter grew up in the East, where he was the son of nice Jewish parents. And had he followed in his father's footsteps, he could have been a stockbroker. Wouldn't that have been a waste? He went to Grinnell College, and in 1962, he and a group of college students went outside the White House to protest the restarting of nuclear testing. And they must have done a really good job, because President John Kennedy invited them into the White House to talk to him about it. I don't think that happens very often. But then he came out here right in the cusp of the 60s. And I believe he was planning to get a graduate degree in writing and poetry. Well, he got it another way. He was one of the founders of the Diggers, the incredible group that fed hundreds and hundreds of people, entertained us, brought us what we were thinking about but hadn't quite figured out. They were a real force in our world in that time. And one of the things Peter did was get sent to London for by the Grateful Dead to find out about this new group, the Beatles. And in the book that we are celebrating tonight, Tongue of a Crow, there is the most incredible poem. You do not want to miss it, about when he was in London with the Grateful Dead and a bunch of really wild characters. His poetry is deep and it is fun. And sometimes it's heavy. You are going to love the poetry in this book. I don't think former President Trump is going to read this book, but his poem, The World on Fire, really hits me in my heart as to what we have gone through and what we fear. His books are amazing. Rainman's Cure, an irregular education, and sleeping where I fall. This guy's an actor, a director, a screenwriter, the voiceover of 200 documentaries, including the Ken Burns documentaries, which I see over and over because I want to hear him talk. He's a songwriter, a guitarist, and a Buddhist priest. So I am going to sit back and enjoy this hour with Susan Woolridge, and Peter Coyote. Thank you both, Susan and Peter, so much.
Thank you, Elaine.
Yes, Elaine, it's great to be here. Peter, I'm going to ring a bell for us.
Okay.
And I'm holding in my hand 2 acorns. And I was just with Peter the other day, and he's planting live oaks in his wonderful yellow plum farm. And so I wanted you to know I have lots of these acorns, Peter. And maybe we should begin with your reading the poem Elaine talked about, because it mentions at the end something I have at the very opening about Battersea, that the sound of oceans we've crossed in our fretful goings and comings, seeking a new world, which seems like that's rather a theme for your life, Peter. Would you like to read us that poem?
Yeah, well, I'll tell you the backstory.
Okay.
In the 1960s, in the beginning of the counterculture in the Haight-Ashbury, the Diggers were pretty widely recognized as people who were really pushing the bookends. We were not trying to open up a store to sell hash pipes and Indian clothing or get 18 inches of counter like our parents did. We wanted to question the whole question of storeness, and we wanted a culture in which we could be authentic. We didn't want to be having to run plays about heroic bus drivers and elevator operators, which would happen if we were in a in a socialist or communist culture. So we began to create theatrical events that would engage people in the kind of world that we wanted to be in. And so at a certain point, the Grateful Dead, who were just guys in the neighborhood, we held a lot of parties, and we would, go to the guys and say, you want to play in Golden Gate Park? And we'd bring free food and everybody would be there. They came and they wanted me and Emmett Grogan to come, and we went with Ken Kesey and some of his people, 2 Hells Angels, one of whom had been a digger, Sweet Willie Tumbleweed, and Pete Nell, who was the president of the San Francisco Hells Angels, brought them and their bikes over, and they brought the first English Hells Angel back, a young kid named Buttons, had the crap scared out of him. So we flew over there, and they wanted us to suss out whether or not the Beatles were as culturally forward as they were musically forward. So this is the poem. It's called London Run. 6 December, London. Gray, junky, pallor sky. 12 to feed and house. Apple office, first stop. Timid George, the skinny one, suggests a cheap hotel where they take anybody. Kesey gone for days. This morning's script croaker, his mad maiden aunt and psychotic kid scratching and washing invisible sores, rents us a flat. Room for 8, plus maiden aunt and freak. 81 Prince of Wales mansion, sandwiched between Kensington and Battersea bridges. Shabby funland across the road, chained for winter. Moldy furs, McVitie's biscuits, Typhoo tea, strainer brewed. Jack's, legal pharmaceutical heroin, more effective than the weak heater eating shillings. Speed freak litter of candy bars, squashed butts, soiled clothes scattered around the stately manse. The sallow motherly clutter for our brood of feral West Coast birds. Stanley Mouse painting the tanks of the Hells Angels choppers parked in the chilled foyer. My little English Jenny Wren, her leather coat and urchin scarf, breast pale as talcum powder, brushes and ties up my hair, laughing, prodding me awake. my loneliness for California's damp green hills and fog. I wish I could fly her home. Patchouli scented Saturday. Desk in a high London window painted shut behind me. Sweet William's eyes closed, dropping cigarette ashes on his clothes. Battersea, they call it. Battered orphans of the wars at home. Sea, the sound of oceans we've crossed in our fretful goings and comings, seeking a new world.
There are those lines. Well, tell me, did the Beatles pass the test?
Well, no, we didn't spend much time with the Beatles. They were afraid of us. It was an interesting mix. If you were to compare and contrast the two cultures, the English, even street people in England, are probably 30% better educated, class for class, than Americans. So, you know, if you listen to Paul's music or John Lennon's music, it's really sophisticated. I mean, at its worst, it sounds like God Rest You Merry Gentlemen. But anybody who could write Yesterdays, you know, he's not mailing it in. But they were riding high. They were plucking all the ripe fruit of capitalism. They were being revered, and they didn't have much to learn from us. And we knew the model that they were activating. We're not too interested in it. But we were good friends with the Beatles publicist, a guy named Derek. Oh, I'm blocking it. He's dead now, but he had come to the Haight-Ashbury and he knew about the Diggers. And at one point they had planned to run a benefit concert in LA. A bunch of LA hipsters and promoters wanted to do a concert as a fundraiser for the Diggers. And Sweet William and I and Peter Berg and Emmett Grogan went down there and said, no, you're not going to charge anybody anything for a Digger concert. It's not happening. So Derek jumped up and he said, that's it. These guys know what's happening. They've always known if they're out, I'm out. And there went the Beatles and there went the concert. So what we did do was we met hipsters from all over Europe. They heard about us. They came in from France, from Holland, provos, and, you know, people from the French revolutionary brigades like Danny the Red and stuff. And we talked and we spread the news with those people about what was really going on. And it was a great visit from that point of view. But, you know, obviously, and as Americans, we were much more feral than the British. I mean, the Hells Angels were no joke. I'll tell you a quick story about how I saved John Lennon's teeth. We were invited to a Christmas party by the Beatles. And we got there at about 4 o'clock and there was no food and no liquor out. And we were just wandering around this kind of empty room with some, you know, Oxford and Cambridge types in shawls and kind of a quiet elegance. And after about an hour and a half of this, Pete Nell, who was inexplicably wearing a tiny little pair of white baby shoes clipped to his Hells Angels colors. No one wanted to ask, believe me. Anyway, he started grousing like, what the fuck kind of way of this to bring people to a party where we want this, we want this. I was sitting on the floor talking to John Lennon, and this twit says, why are you making a fuss? And Pete said, because I'm hungry. The guy said, oh my word, it's uncool to be hungry. And Pete dropped him like a bad habit, just hit him once, knocked him out. And John Lennon's eyes went like saucers and he went, what's the matter with him then? And Pete turned around and pointed at him and said, Coyote, tell him to sit still or he's next. So, you know, it was not civil discourse. And
well, you just said Coyote, and a moment ago, Pablo or Chico poked a head up behind you. That's one of your, Peter has 2 wonderful dogs. And what my most learned thing I want to say about your book, including the poem you just read that had wren in it and mouse and Westcote birds, is that 33 of your poems have animals in them, Peter.
My God, you counted?
Counted because, yeah, I counted because it kept striking me. And many of them have birds. And
yes, that's true. And fish and roosters,
donkey,
pigeons.
Mink. And I just thought you might want to say a little something about animals in your life. And even crows and what crows mean to you. I'm reading, maybe you should read, let's read Snow Geese and Crows. Can I read it to you? And then I'd like you to read it.
Sure, just a minute. Let me find, what page is it?
It's on page 56.
56.
Because
If you read it better than I do, the interview's over.
okay, sweetheart.
Okay, let's
The
go.
woman's, Peter and I have competed in the past telling Mel Brooks jokes to a friend. Anyway, I just want to say that this poem is, it's kind of like the opposite of the Beatles poem, because the book is really about your journey, it seems to me, from a certain one kind of life to another. And here we're leaping into the Buddha life. So it's called Snow Geese and Crows, and I'll mess it up, Peter, on your behalf. Small ache in my low back, the cold finger of death, maybe just an ache. Behind the finger, Buddha nature. Behind Buddha nature, no nature. Behind no nature, fat crows in the pickleweed. So I'd love you to read it. I'd love you. Well,
That was perfect. You got it. You got every stress in it.
Thank you, love.
Snow geese and crows. Small ache in my low back. The cold finger of death. Maybe just an ache. Behind the finger, Buddha nature. Behind Buddha nature, no nature. Behind no nature, fat crows in the pickleweed. Well, so this is like a little primer in Buddhist philosophy. So when Buddha, the great contribution that Buddha made to sort of human thought was his understanding of what he called dependent origination. Dependent origination means no this, no that. No sunlight, no apple. No water, no apple tree. No oxygen, no Susan. No microbes in the soil, no Peter. And that as much as we all appear to be separate singularities, we're actually all bound to one indivisible monad. Unlike the Abrahamic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, it's not a contradictory religion. It's not a religion at all. Buddha was just a normal person who solved the problem. So behind all the apparent diversity of individual forms in the universe is a kind of pregnant energy, which is formless, which is completely empty. And my favorite metaphor for it is to imagine an ocean, a choppy ocean, not with rolly waves, but with millions of little wavelets rising and falling, little peaks, like whipped cream coming and falling. So you could call each of these wavelets a nameable object in the universe. You could call it a human life. You could call it a thought, an impulse. You could call it a species. You could call it a mountain range. They all follow the same principle. They arise from the ocean, formlessness, into form for a while, and then they settle back. And when they rise into form, we say they're alive. And when they settle back, we say they're dead and we are sad. But what we forget and what those little wavelets forget is that they've never for one instant not been part of the ocean. So here's me being like a Jewish hypochondriac. I have a backache and I immediately think I'm on the verge of death. And then the adult Peter comes in and says, well, wait, maybe it just is an ache. Well, behind that idea of a finger is Buddha nature. And what Buddha nature is the pregnant emptiness of the universe, this vibrant energy, maybe string theory, which is always on the verge of becoming objects. They rise, they fall like these little waves. They come into an apparent separate existence, and then they sink back into emptiness again. And so we call that Buddha nature.
Right.
Right. Buddha nature is no nature. It's formless. And the way formlessness expresses itself is always in specificity. Fat crows in the pickleweed.
It's perfect ending. But what I wanted to say is that you're a rascal. This man is a rascal, and he's a very kind rascal. And you sometimes hide your kindness, Peter, but your early poems in this book are difficult to read because of the difficulty of your childhood. before you had discovered Buddhism. And it almost seems as if you're challenging us to love you regardless of what you put in front of us. It, like the woodchuck poem was so hard. It's just so hard. And you have the courage to share your toughest experiences and your toughest views of yourself. And then we see the Zen moving into your life. Is there another one you'd like to read?
Well, sure. Let me say one thing about that, though, Susan.
Yes.
So this book represents 50 years of work.
Yes.
So there are poems from the very, very early 60s all the way up. And I think I told the story. I came out here to go to graduate school to study with Robert Duncan. And Robert Duncan was this extraordinary poet whose IQ had never been tracked. They couldn't find the top of it. And his lectures in class ran from Etruscan oracles to the Delphic oracles to Ezra Pound to every kind of ancient literary reference from Homer to, God knows what. And I would sit in class like an idiot. I didn't have any idea what he was talking about. And I looked around at my classmates and they'd be going, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I decided that I was just too stupid for poetry. And I quit graduate school to shoot heroin and run the diggers. But many years later, I was with Michael McClure, who's one of my friends, and I had a lot of poet friends. And when I told Michael that story and mentioned that the kids were all going, mm-hmm, mm-hmm, Michael lied and said they lied. I mean, he laughed and said they lied. So
yeah.
The thing about the poems is I kept them in a drawer. And when I turned 75, I kept writing all the time. When I turned 75, I thought, my poor kids, they're going to find this pile of paper. They're going to be intimidated by it. They're not going to want to throw it away. They're not going to know what to do. So I started working with a wonderful poet named Patrick Donnelly. And we would do 2 to 5 poems every 2 weeks and interrogate them and take them apart. And we did this for 2 or 3 years. And I really learned how to write and interrogate my own poems. But if you think that I'm writing to make you like me or love me, it's a big mistake.
I don't think so. No, that isn't quite what I meant. I feel as if what you're doing is having the courage to put all of you out there you're not with no expectation of the reader. You have the courage to put sides of you out there that a lot of people hide. It's kind of like the people that were nodding in the Duncan class. You don't hide. And I feel as if you've lived your life as if it were a poem, which is to go out there on a limb. And one thing I wanted to ask you before I forget is, do you remember how old you were? Do you remember the first time you wrote a poem or you sat down and felt you were writing a poem?
Yeah, I was 7. And I wrote a poem that scared my father to death because he realized that I had a completely different order of mind than his. He went to MIT when he was 15. He was a mathematical wizard. He was a boxer. He was a black belt in judo. And he could not understand how I got those images and how that worked. And it sort of scared him and made him feel that maybe I was too delicate for the world. And so he took it upon himself to toughen me up, which was sort of the wrong strategy for a little poetic kid. But yeah, I started writing at 7.
Do you remember what you wrote?
Yes, I wrote a little poem about the tide coming in at Southampton, how the waves were like little horses prancing in.
Which is just what you were talking about in the Buddha nature describing.
Yeah, so then when I was 16, see this book? When I was 16, my family had a friend who was a blacklisted writer. And I gave him some of my writing to look at. And when I next saw him, he said to me very seriously, he said, Peter, you're a writer and you have to take responsibility for being a writer. You must always carry a notebook because you'll forget things. And since I was 16 years old, I've never gone out without a notebook. So I take it seriously. But here's the thing about, it's not exactly courage. As a Zen teacher, one of the things I try to point out to people is that, like, human beings are kind of like a radio that's set to the human frequency. And that human frequency can transmit anything any human can think, say, or do, from Hitler to Mother Teresa, from Pol Pot to Bishop Tutu. And when we know that, we can be on guard for what comes over the spinal telephone. We don't let certain stuff beyond our lips or twitch our muscles to do something. We don't flip somebody the finger because it's very close to pulling a trigger. So when I write these poems, all I'm doing is actually looking at my peculiar makeup, what's in there. I'm not particularly a nice person, but I'm not a not nice person. I'm a human being, and that encompasses everything from being an asshole to being a saint. So I don't want to present a distorted picture of what a human being is. And knowing my worst saves me from executing it, as opposed to my countrymen who think of themselves as the good guys and could drop bombs on a hotel in Beirut in the middle of the night, killing men, women, and children in their bed because we didn't like that country's leader. When you think of yourself as the good guys, you've pushed all your shadows on other people.
And don't you think writing helps you articulate that shadow self and see it? And I just think for me, it's like a salvation. I mean,
I got a lot of shadow poems in here.
Well, and when you said that that when you began calling yourself Coyote, which is the Jew of the animal world, you said that Rolling Thunder said the universe opened its mind to you and you were able to completely be unknown, move away from that Jewish background, which I wish I had done. I tried to do it with Wooldridge, but and you suddenly were able to expand who you were so enormously. I would think that would have made it much more possible for you to be a poet and to do your writing.
Well, it made it possible for me to be authentic.
Yeah.
Which is the step before being a poet. I mean, I had a peyote experience where I had a gesture with a coyote and I didn't know what it meant. I was in college. We'd sent away for a big box of peyote and eaten it in some friends' rooms and gotten high. And I went out and I ran around the hills of the flatlands of Iowa all night. And I woke up in a cornfield in the morning, still stoned. And I was in the mud. I don't know if you can see this. In the mud were all these little footprints.
Yeah, yeah.
Just like that.
Yeah.
And I didn't know if I'd made them or some animal had made them. And about 4 years later, I was living with this Paiute Shoshone Indian shaman. I was fixing his toilet and his truck, and I hauled his kid out of a cult commune and just trying to learn what I could learn from him.
This was Rolling Thunder, right?
Yeah. And I told him this story and he said, well, what are you going to do about it? I said, what do you mean? What am I going to do? He said, well, the universe opened its mind to you.
Yeah.
So you have two choices. You can treat it like a hallucination. It's okay. You'll just grow up to be a white man and have a normal life. Or you could treat it as a great gift and dedicate yourself to understanding it, and you might become a human being. And I thought, oh, I like the sound of that. So it took me for about 3 months. And then I decided to take the name as the beginning of this vehicle. And I was 26 then, and I'm 80 now. So I've been Coyote almost 3 times the time I was Peter Kohan.
I don't even want to know what your father thought about that, but I love something you said. It was in another interview. You said that when you woke up, you said, whoa, my hands are dizzy. And
no, my friend said that. We had eaten all this peyote and nothing happened. So my friend Terry Bisson, a great writer, by the way.
Yeah.
Terry Bisson jumped up and said, well, I'm going back to my room. And when he stood up, he said, hey, my hands are dizzy. And we all got high in that moment. It was just like, we were gone.
So Peter, would you read Plink Plunk for us? It's on page 48.
Yeah.
I'd like to read it first, so you get to hear it. That's why I want to read it to you. In my workshops, I read them to the kids so they get to hear how wonderful they sound. Just called Plink Plunk. Trees comb water from fog, sigh, sing, play, the glistening ground of mind. Trees comb water, sigh, sing, play, the glistening ground of mind.
It's it in a nutshell.
Do you want to read it for us too? Yeah, that seemed to cover what, yeah, the whole Buddha mind.
Plink, plunk, trees comb water from fog. Sigh, sing, play. The glistening ground of mind. Trees comb water. Sigh, sing, play. The glistening ground of mind.
It's so beautiful.
So
And thank
you
God
like
it's,
these little delicate Zen poems.
well, that was what your father was afraid of. He was right.
Yeah. Let me read you one of my monster poems.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, this one's interesting because, no, I'll read you one, a monster poem.
Which one?
It's called Two Conversations in Chicago. It's page 21.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I was planning to start with some of, yeah. This is what I mean about you're very willing to show all parts of yourself, which not everyone does. And I love it that you do this.
So, Two Conversations in Chicago. If these walls could talk, huh? She gurgles conspiratorially, maneuvering a pink suitcase between the stainless steel jaws of the elevator as they hiss closed. I'm trapped in the bad air of her soiled hair, sullen face, cheesy white plastic belt, and cheap shoes. I disguise a gasp as preparation to speak. These walls? You mean the Chicago thing? Capone? She cocks her head as if inquiring if I'm alive. What did you think I meant? And the rumble of our descent appears to emanate from her mouth as a growl. I couldn't say I wasn't thinking anything. I didn't say, why don't you get your teeth fixed or brush them? I nearly said, hey, I've been demoted by divorce of a wife I never cheated on to this shabby shithole hotel and the forced confinement of an 8-floor drop while my silence is being violated by a woman resembling a pork chop. I wanted to say, couldn't we just stand here quietly while I stare into the perfect, undistorted mirror of myself that is you?
That ending is so great because you turn it all back on yourself.
Well, I mean, that's part of the game. The game is that you don't not think these thoughts. The game is that you contain them and that then you own them.
My mother, when she was 97, lost all ability to contain them. And we were having dinner one time and it was horrible. She said about the waitress, she thinks she has good legs. Luckily, she didn't hear it. But Peter, this is a great thing I'm going to use in workshops. I couldn't say, I didn't say, I nearly said, I wanted to say. That's a wonderful lead in. Thank you. And yeah, that's what I mean about you're willing to show parts of it, about yourself that a lot of people aren't. And you do that throughout, especially at the beginning, because there is a shift toward the end where you're a little more philosophical, you're a little more in your Buddha mind. I love some of the very short ones. And count the animals in here, Peter. It's amazing.
They just show up, you know. I mean, I live in this world of animals. I feed 28 crows every day. I call them in and I go through about 40 pounds of black sunflower seeds a month. It's like a bird brain, and my hat is completely filled with feathers that the birds drop here. This morning I saw a great horned owl that was bigger than my lamp.
Wow. I wanted to ask you about crows in particular, because I know you even have them on your gates. And can you say what it is about the crow? I would just off the top of my head, it seems the bird most like Coyote among the animals.
The crow and the raven are tricksters. First of all, they're as intelligent as primates.
Yeah.
They've discovered that the way birds' brains are folded amplifies their powers so that they can do with their brain what a chimp can do or what a human can do. And the more you learn about crows, the more phenomenally brilliant they are. There's a YouTube video where a guy puts a crow in a room with a glass tube and there's a clam in the bottom of it. and there's a piece of wire laying on the table. And the crow futzes around with this thing until he knocks the tube over, and then he bends the wire into a hook and fishes it out with this wire, pulls the clam out to eat it. So the idea that we somehow are different from the animals by having intelligence, a chickadee can remember 5,000 sites where it's buried food.
Wow.
You know, they have phenomenal capacities. And so I love living with these creatures. And I mean, most of them are more gifted than we are by far. They don't have, go ahead.
Do you have any bush tits?
I have bush tits.
Oh,
I have titmice.
Yeah.
Oh my, yes,
And I
yes.
have, I've got juncos, I've got sparrows, I've got goldfinches, I've got starlings, I've got flickers, I've got phoebes, rufous phoebes, I've got thrushes, I've got mockingbirds. It's just a zoo here.
Yeah.
So they just pop up in my universe and they come up. I mean, there's also insects in my poem. Here's a really early poem called Papery Old Lady at My Green Light. I was maybe 30 when I wrote this. Papery old lady, blue veins winding down, strangled in her wrists, an irritating whisper crossing Divisadero. Young, I thought, what does she have to sing about? Empty of sensation, save the tick and swell of her central crumpled muscle. One satiric eye, wandering, bright beetle shell, imminent with hum, hardly human the other, its winding sheet winding up her exposed film. Me, I had no plans to die.
I have that circled, that incredible image of wandering bright beetle shell, imminent with hum. Peter, that's beautiful, beautiful writing. Yeah, I have 2 dots next to it in the margin. Was hoping you'd read that one. Have you noticed that you've never, I'm sure you have, that you've never seen a dead crow by the side of the road? They don't get hit by cars.
Not much. I've never seen a dead crow. I've taken a lot of owls off the road. I used to be God's own jump man in the 60s. And even today, I still stop and move animals off the road. It annoys me that people will kill an animal and just leave it there. And then other animals get killed trying to eat it. So, you know, when I smoked, I used to sprinkle a little tobacco on it and say a little couple words. And now if I'm driving by and it's too dangerous, I at least bow, I at least acknowledge it.
Peter, would you read Olima Winter?
Yeah.
Would you like me to read it first? It's fun to just hear you read it.
Yeah, well, I worry about the audience having to sit through a poem they might or might not like twice.
Well, what I've learned is that people sometimes want to hear them twice, but
Okay,
well,
let's try it.
Well,
what page is it?
This one's longer, so maybe you should just read it. It's page 65, because Peter lived in Olima for years. And again, this one has a cricket, crow bones, a quail, and a blue-eyed dog in it. I marked all the animals.
So in Olima, between Point Reyes and the town of Point Reyes and the stop sign at Olima, about 1.5 miles back from the road, was a little 19th century redwood farmhouse, 5 bedrooms, just like a shotgun house, no electricity, a 5-gallon hot water heater, kerosene hot water heater. And I lived back there for a while, recovering from hepatitis when I got back from London. It's another story. And little by little, my digger friends moved in and we set up a commune there. And so Olima was just a great place. I lived there for about 3 years until the people who leased the land for their cattle threw us off because they didn't like our dogs chasing the cows. So this is called Olima Winter. Quiet, scarred kitchen, sizzling lamp wick, kerosene perfume. Not one cricket, only the beautiful girl threading a necklace of crow bones. Chips of firelight dance on my ring. New screens all around, broken panes replaced last September. This table's names carved by many knives. 4 guns, each over a door. The shotgun killed 4 quail with 1 blast. Heads drying in a paper bag, feet crimped and stiff in a ceramic sake cup, breasts and legs in my belly, feathers in her hair, entrails in the blue-eyed dog. In the first rain of winter, I shot them all together in their little covey.
See, there's that little boy sad about it, and the man who had to do it and glad about it. And what was the question I wanted to ask you about that? How did you feel about that? How do you feel about using a gun? I'm curious.
Well, I used to be a marksman instructor, and I grew up, I got my first gun from my father at 10. And at Olima, I was a poacher. I kept us all in meat. And there were these Asian deer that had been released in Point
Hog
Reyes.
Island in Larkspur.
What? Who was that?
Somebody came in, I think it was Terry Strauss.
Oh,
Terry, you better mute yourself wherever you are.
she did. Anyway, so these fallow deer competed with the regular deer, and they were about 70, 80 pounds. And I would go out with a friend, and we'd take a handful of tea and a teapot and some jerky and raisins, and we'd stay out till we got a deer. And then we would skin it and spread the skin out and cut 4 strips in the back, 4 parallel strips. And we'd quarter it and put the meat in it and knot the legs across it, and then slip my arms through the straps and pack it back overland so we didn't cross any roads. And that would feed, 20 people meat and stew. So, I spend every Sunday at the shooting range. I don't hunt anymore. I stopped hunting after I became a Buddhist, and at a certain point I had gotten more than my share of animal lives. But I loved shooting. I loved the sense of like Zen archery,
And I would love to ask you about Gary Snyder, because he's been such a big influence on your life, and because it seems that you were living in a lot of chaos with people that were using drugs, kind of chaotic. And I've noticed you're an orderly person. I've noticed how much you love wonderful tools. You love to take care of your knife. You're very careful with everything. You built a Zendo very carefully. And a lot of that came from Gary. Is that correct? And you when you first met him, and I'd like to know how he might have influenced your poems. Did he?
So it was curious, but not Gary or any of the poets that I lived with. And there were many: Lenore Candell, Gary Snyder, Philip Whalen,
Corso?
Gregory Corso, Lou Welch was my roommate. Gregory was my roommate. I never told any of them that I was writing poems, but Gary was the first person I had ever met who had actually lived as a Buddhist. He had spent 9 years in a Japanese monastery as a monk. And I thought, if I married a Japanese wife, wrote and spoke Japanese. And I thought, if anybody knows what Zen is about, it's going to be this guy. And, I didn't go for Steve Gaskin and the Farm or Bubba Free John or any of these kind of self-appointed gurus. But Gary was, the thing that impressed me about Gary, how most people are unevenly developed. In other words, in America, if you have a big bicep, we'll say, oh man, that's a great bicep. You could brand that. You could open a chain of gyms. You could sell food supplements. That's a great bicep. Well, the Zen practice would say, something, that's a great bicep. Let's let that alone. That'll take care of itself. Let's bring the rest of the body up to that capacity. And so that's what impressed me about Gary. He did everything as well as he did anything. He fixed his Jeep as carefully as he wrote a poem. He took care of his kids as impeccably. He took care of his tools. His whole life seemed to be on a kind of plane of awareness that I couldn't exactly understand, but I wanted to learn it. I wanted to imitate it.
I see that in you, Peter. That's what has struck me when I talk about you to other people, just the care with which you do things. That Peter gathered how many acorns and made flour?
Oh,
And,
about 15 pounds.
and how much plum jam have you put up? When I was walking one day and a neighbor had given you how many flats of tomatoes, and you made, I don't even know what you made, but you seem to do what Gary modeled for you.
Well,
And
what Gary modeled for me was attention, clarity, working at your own pace, and trying to fit into the rhythms of the place you live harmoniously. In other words, I became really interested in Native Americans, not because I was going to be an Indian, but because I understood that they were the encyclopedias of this place. You know, a pygmy child, a 10-year-old pygmy child in the Ituri forest knows 600 species of plants and animals. So the jungle is like his living room. They know at what season to harvest it, how to use it. And I wanted to have that sense of intimacy with where I lived.
you know, you wrote a poem for his wife, for Carol Coda.
Yeah,
It's
I did.
called Spilled Rice. It's on page 78. What would you read that one for us?
Yeah, I will. So she's Gary's second wife and was somebody I was madly in love with. She was just a great friend. And she had a very long and prolonged stomach cancer that required many, many operations and anguish and stuff like that. And she was dying slowly for a long time, but she never complained. She was never down. She was a bird bander, would catch birds and band their little legs. And so you can imagine the quickness and precision of doing that. And then the last night I saw her, I had brought her a cake, and we sat up and we ate an entire coconut cake with our bare hands, laughing and talking. And I don't, you know, she died. I wanted to honor her. So this is called, and she came from a rice growing family in the Central Valley. So you'll hear some of the names of some of the brands of rice that they made.
And there
Japanese
three
people.
birds in there. Three birds. There's shrikes and falcons and egrets in this poem.
Her sack of rice has burst. Grains everywhere mixed with dirt. Everything ruined, except the cake we ate with our hands that last visit. Her fearless bone-white teeth. The grains swirl, eddy, and drift in the mind, become spirit, gravity-free. Her tender fingers that banded the legs of shrikes and falcons are now fog, brushing the schist and serpentine, rising with the tang of kit-kit dizzy bush, vaulting over the trees. Is she headed south to the farm country where she grew, to shadow and cool her kinsmen stooped in the paddies? Is she a cloud now? Shokchikubai, Mochiko, Kokuho Rose, Koda family sweet, unsullied rice. Egrets, I almost wrote regrets. White as unopened bandages, forage the toxic soil. Gone, gone, gone beyond. Carol, you'll come back as the rain.
So beautiful. I hope Gary has seen that poem.
Yes, he has. He has. And you know, this gone, gone, gone beyond is the from the Heart Sutra. And it's the sutra that explains the Buddhist theory of emptiness. And it ends with this mantra, which is a kind of guide to recall the whole teaching. So there's this teaching. It's about a page long. It's the core of Buddhist understanding. And then at the end, it says, so the Prajna Paramita is the great, is the utmost mantra, is the supreme mantra. And the mantra is just a way to remember this lesson. And it actually goes gate, gate, paragate, parasamgate, bodhi, which means awake, svaha, done. And the translation is gone, gone, gone beyond, beyond. Bodhi, svaha.
Oh, it's so beautiful. You know, Peter, you said for me to try to be alert. It is 6:20. We have gone 50 minutes.
No
I-
kidding. What time did we start?
I know.
We'll see if there's any questions, if people want to ask
We
questions.
started at 5:30, and I'm just hearing the ending of that poem seemed like a good break period. So I did want to say that China's Shaolin, also emptiness is at the heart of it all, and Lao Tzu. And so that poem is stunning. I'm so glad you read
I'm
that.
I'm so glad you like it. How
So-
would we see if there were questions?
Yes.
Do we have questions?
Okay. Ask them if they're awake. If you're not awake, we're not going to continue. So
Well,
we can go on a little.
yes, please. I'd
So
like-
here's one I like. This is sort of a mid-level poem. This is when I was working in the movies, and I had been a Buddhist for some time. This is called The Dogs of Bucharest.
Oh, I love that one.
I was filming in Romania,
Yeah.
and then I see Nick Mitchell will answer his question.
And it comments on your feeling about your film life. There's just a
Yeah,
little-
exactly. The dogs of Bucharest are dusted with crumbled mansions, ash of red flags. They doze in ruined dreams, abandoned by their masters. They bark, whelp, and die without plan or permission. Occasionally, like thinkers, like poets, they are rounded up and shot. A bitch with flapping teats haunts the ruined foundry where I film diversions for my country. Feral eyes watch me poke a sumptuous lunch, the roll I proffer. She trembles, her whimpering pups beneath a rack of iron. Sad and sooty sumacs, tattered sorrel, scattered pages of a book. It's cheap to film in ruined lands. There's a story that the Buddha gave his body to starving lion cubs. The hunger of the dog. Would a better man feed her his fingers?
where I filmed diversions for my country. I'm so glad you have.
Lands.
So what's Nick's question? Let me see if I can click on it on my computer.
I see several
Oh,
questions.
here's a bunch.
Yeah, Susan and
Yeah, let's see. I'll go to the chat.
Nick says, Peter, will you return to Broadway?
Yeah.
I won't return to Broadway because I've never been to Broadway. As close as I got was I did the opening of a play called Jake's Women for Neil Simon in San Diego, which he decided was not good enough to go to Broadway and left us in midstream. Then he opened it on Broadway, but it was a bomb. So I've never played Broadway. Magic Altman asks, already did. What's that mean? Peter, do you see the coyote as the fool and the magician? I see the coyote as an expression of emptiness, just as I see myself. Sometimes a fool, sometimes a magician, sometimes an idiot, sometimes grand. Ariel, that's my daughter's name. Ariel Smythe asks, amazing words, sources of inspiration. What's your writing practice like now? Well, my writing practice for prose is quite different than my writing practice for poetry.
But I meant to ask that. Yes.
When I'm working on a prose book, if I can get 3 hours a day, that's a satisfying day. But I try to at least get an hour. And I don't usually know where I'm going. I don't think it out too much. I never try to edit when I'm in a kind of creative mode. I just get it down and then go back to edit. Poetry, I just keep track of little thoughts and ideas and keep revisiting them. And when it all seems to have gelled for a while, I'll take a stab at writing a first draft. And then I let it gestate, and then I'll look at it and interrogate it, each one of the words that I've used, and see where it goes.
And I wanted to show off Peter's wonderful books, memoirs,
You're too
Sleeping.
close to the screen.
Oh, yeah. How's that? Is that better?
Yeah, so Sleeping Where I Fall is about the radical anarchist left during the 60s, the Diggers and all of that. And I'm sort of like a string on which a bunch of pearls are strung, who are all the characters and wild people that I was with. And then The Rain Man's Third Cure is about mentors and teachers and coming to the understanding that what we need is wisdom. Lisa Bolognese asks, will signed copies of this book be available? What are going to be available are book plates, which if you order a book, you can tell Elaine how you'd like it signed, and she will send me book plates with your name. Yeah, that's for Tongue of a Crow. But I'll do it with anything. So here Bar Davi asks, how do your poems come to you or through you? Are they fully formed? Are you inspired by an experience, phrase, or moment? No, they don't come fully formed at all. I'm going to read you a poem. This is sort of my poem for the Trump years. And this poem came with, it's called The Burned Oak. And it came with just this image of pigs rooting through a burned forest. And this is what it turned into. The Burned Oak. They rooted too long during the war, ate the tender shoots after the forest burned, the water fouled. Mount a watch, heard what swine are left into the rusty pen, make a gate from the old barn boards, women wet the knives. The oldest boy chooses, shoots it in the head. A 22 will do the job, but it may scream. Force a sharpened rod between back leg, tendon, and bone, hoist it into the burned oak, cut the throat, drain the blood into a bucket, if you can find one. Pour scalding water down the body, scrape the hair off the skin, take a sharp blade, slice the belly open, move the organ meat to the kid's wagon. Squeeze the guts clean, wash for winter sausage. We need something like a barrel to pack what we don't eat with salt in case the generator goes, in case we have to fight again. So, you know, that poem evolved as things got crazier, and I began to imagine armed conflict between red and blue states in the 2024 elections. I realized that, you know, we're the same species as the men and women in Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and it would not take much for this country to degenerate into warlords and armed camps and ruin this fragile experience. So it evolved from this image of pigs foraging in a burned out forest. I didn't know where it was going to go.
I would like to just read a little bit of The Rain Man's Third Cure, which is like a poem, just a brief description. This reminded me of it. You're talking about Joe Kornweiser, and you wrote Kornweiser. Joe was an old school hustler, a salesman to his marrow, with a large square face fixed on a fire plug body, eyes that had seen it all, indescribably pale and diffuse, as if disappointment had scrubbed them of expectation. I just wanted to pop that in because some of Peter's prose is very much like a poem. And that made, when I was thinking about Trump, that description popped into my mind.
That guy was my father's business partner. And after my father died, he convinced me that I was sitting on my mother's shoulder and convinced me to go to Wall Street to try to win back my father's farm, a true disaster. As F. Scott Fitzgerald said once, it was like repainting your half of a dilapidated double house. So Namklidra Cohen asks, why do we need gravity? I don't know. We have it. Maybe I'm missing some subtlety in your question, but it's part of the set. If you could express the 1960s in a sentence, what would it be? I'd say 2 words: hopeful agency. We felt like we could make change and we were hopeful. And when I see kids today with safety pins through their eyebrows and needles through their cheeks and their ears, they're usually the sweetest, gentlest kids. And what I see are people showing me how much pain they're in, because from their point of view, being 20, it looks pretty hopeless sometimes. We didn't feel hopeless. We failed in a lot of what we tried to do, but there was a feeling of hopefulness and agency, like we can do this. So there's some other poem. Oh, here we go. What's the secret to keeping your heart open the older we become? Being open to others and new experiences. The secret is to forget about yourself. The secret is to meditate and learn how to step outside of your personality, which is only able to do one of 3 things: like, dislike, or be neutral. But when you can step outside of that a little bit, there are infinite options in emptiness. So just forget about yourself. Just do what you have to do. Children's outdoor play asks, just curious, what are you eating? I live alone. And so sometimes I don't always cook much, although there's this Israeli chef named Otto Lengi, who's a Middle Eastern, he's a gay Jewish chef, and he's married to a gay Jewish Palestinian guy. And they wrote these books of Middle Eastern cooking. And so once in a while, I go into the store and I buy everything for one of those recipes, and I make that stuff like mejadra, and it'll feed me for 5 days. But usually I eat very simply. In the morning, I just make a cappuccino and a couple of pieces of toast, peanut butter, and my homemade jam. And then usually I'll cook one meal. I'll cook at dinner or something. I make really good collard greens with ham hocks. I make really good beans. I make really good omelets, but I'm a pretty elemental cook. I don't eat.
What were you eating right now, Peter?
I was eating a vocal zone throat lozenge. These are what I bring to Ken Burns all the time. When you're talking a lot, they protect your throat. Do I remember the Kesey house on Steiner? No, I don't. I don't think I was in the Kesey house. And then Nick says, that's it. No more questions.
My turn. And I remember the 60s and how much we hoped. And I'm so glad that you did not stay a stockbroker in the East. Would have been a terrible thing.
Oh, I was a terrible failure at it.
Well, what you've brought us is, and what Susan has brought us tonight, has been beautiful and important.
Thanks,
and I'd like to remind everyone that tell everyone that on the 7th of December, Anne Lamott is going to be here with us, and we are going to celebrate Peter's next book, his new book, Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet the Buddha, Mass Meditation and Inspired Play. I can't say it. I'm going to make Peter say it. But at any rate, it's going to be quite a night too. We're going to have a great time on the 7th. If you'd like to pre-order the Lone Ranger and Tonto Meet the Buddha, come to bookpassage.com or at the stores, and we'd love for you to do that. And I have a secret to tell you. We had a bunch of Tongue of the Crow in the store, and everyone came and bought them. And so we have more on order. And when you either come in the store, call us, or buy online, please tell us how you would like it signed. Now, please don't ask for a 3-page paragraph, but if you'd like it to someone or something, I will send it'll take a little while, but I will send the book plate to Peter. It won't take Peter long once I send him the book plates. And then he'll send them back, and we will send you the book, or you can pick it up. So please do order the books. That's what keeps us here. And How about ordering Poem Crazy if you're thinking that you would like to improve your poetry, enjoy poetry? Oh, please order Susan's Poem Crazy. And I'll look forward to seeing all of you on the 7th of December and in between as
I
well.
just want to say one thing, which is that Book Passage, if you have not been to Book Passage, it's worth a pilgrimage. It's the most amazing bookstore. In Book Passage, I've met Martha Beck. I've met Anthony Doerr. The names are not coming to me right now, but you wander for hours in this beauty of this bookstore. If you ask me, it's the heart of possibly Marin County and extending into Sonoma, and we must support it. It's a treasure, and Elaine is at the heart of it. And thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you,
for
Susan
that, Susan.
and Elaine.
And thank you, Peter, for asking me to do this. It's a delight always to be with you.
What an evening. Thank you all. And I hope everyone is going to enjoy reading. And we'll see you on the 7th of December, if not before. You are going to love Tongue of a Crow. And don't forget to tell me what you'd like on your book plate. Something short. With huge thanks. Good night to everyone. Good night.